Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. So today is a show on a movie that I have watched so many times I literally have lost count, and watched it again last night. And I've done multiple shows on this film, but this film I just feel is such a harrowing experience, one of the most terrifying films ever made, and just from a even like a historical perspective, I think it's one of the most influential and one of the most important movies ever made. And that is the one and only The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. I watched this movie again last night. I've been on this kick of watching the movies. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a huge franchise, and there's four movies. I really love the beginning, which is kind of the origins of Leatherface, and then I like the reboot that came out with Jessica Biel quite a few years ago. I didn't like those films at first, but now I actually really love those movies, and so I've been revisiting this amazing franchise, and I watched the reboots or the remakes first, and then last night I watched the original from 1974, directed by Toby Hooper. And um, my God, what a classic! This movie never gets old. I actually, as many times as I've seen this film, it is such a gripping experience. It's one of the most visceral, one of the most low down and dirty horror experiences one can ever have. I mean, it's the very definition of guerrilla filmmaking. Low down and dirty, low budget horror exploitation. Everything in this film is so real. The thing that, and again, I look at movies and albums for that matter as kind of like, I don't know, like things age like fine wine. Like you get something new out of it each time at different stages of your life. And the thing that really stood out to me, and it has before, obviously, but stood out to me even more, is the masterful cinematography by Daniel Pearl. Daniel Pearl also did those two previous films I talked about. They brought him back to do those films, which really give those films the edge that they needed. But his work in this film as a cinematographer is just simply breathtaking. And also the score that was co-composed or written by Toby Hooper. Those two components, the cinematography and the music, are just so powerful that I feel like they literally take on this presence in the film, like that they are characters into themselves. And from the opening frame of Texas, there is this overwhelming sense of horror is coming your way. The other thing is the opening narration by John Larroquette is again bone chilling. And the other thing at this movie just feels so real, and it feels like a documentary, almost more than a film. And I have such a deep connection to this film. This is a movie actually when I was a kid, my mom especially, I got introduced to horror through my mom, and she's a big fan of slasher movies and all kinds of horror films. I really got also into Alfred Hitchcock through her. So we used to watch the Friday the 13th movies together as a family, the Halloween films. But growing up, there were certain films and movies that my mom would not let me watch until I was older. And this was one of them. The movies that she wouldn't let me watch until I was older was The Exorcist and the original from '74 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I remember I didn't see this film until I was in college. Like I was in my 20s when I saw this. I didn't like necessarily grow up watching it. So I watched it and for the first time in my 20s. And I remember talking to my mom about that, like why that was the case. And her reasoning was that The Exorcist as well, but this film especially just felt it felt too real. And this movie and The Exorcist terrified her so much, like to her core. And this movie especially just felt too real to really watch because it felt like everything was really happening. And that was one of the reasons I wasn't allowed to watch this until I was in college. So pretty wild. And watching this now, it's again, it just so stands up to the test of time, and it's such a visceral experience. This is one of those movies I've talked about many times. I've done multiple shows on this movie. I've done did a big show on the entire franchise. There's a lot of movies in the franchise I don't really like. Um, those two first films I mentioned, I actually really like. As far as the newer films, I really love those movies. I think they're awesome. And I really love the sequel that Toby Hooper directed, which is amazing and so radically different. But the best one, without a doubt, hands down, it's a no-brainer, is the original Texas. And there's so many things about this film that, like, I mean, it's still talked about, and it's one of the most influential movies. I mean, Ridley Scott, for instance, who directed Alien in '79, said that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was like the most terrifying movie he had ever seen, and that was like he took Texas as kind of a blueprint to make Alien. The whole truckers in space, the old dark house kind of aesthetic, and it's influenced a bazillion other movies. I mean, one of the most important films. Even I think even if you're not, say, a horror fan, but if you're a fan of film and, say, film history, I feel like this movie is so important. It's like right up there with like the work of Orson Welles, like Citizen Kane, for instance. One of those seminal movies that really brought this sense of like something new and fresh and ushered in change. I think Texas is one of those movies. It's one of the most important movies ever made. And watching it last night, it is easily one of the most riveting, one of the most intense and terrifying films ever made. And again, it is due to like what my mom's reasoning was behind it was that it just feels so fucking real, like everything you're experiencing. And the other thing that's always kind of surprised me or baffled me over the years is how Texas always has this reputation as being this bloodbath of a film. And, there really isn't any gore. I mean, there's blood in this film, obviously, but there really isn't a lot of gore when you get right down to it and you watch this movie. There really isn't. It's really, I think, all psychological. Um, I think if you're going to compare it to, say, an experience of another film, I'd say it has more in line with, say, a film like, say, In Cold Blood, or the famous film that was based off the Truman Capote book, or say Silence of the Lambs, where those films are psychological horror, as opposed to like say a slasher film like The New York Ripper. I feel like Texas is more aligned with those kinds of films because it's really all it's all like psychological, the terror that you're experiencing and that what the characters are experiencing. It's like this film is like the perfect portrayal of like homicidal terror in every conceivable way. Yeah. I have multiple editions of this epic movie. I have a VHS copy I have a real generic version of it on DVD. I have this amazing steelbook edition of it on DVD. I have another version of it, I think, on Blu-ray, or another version of it on DVD. And then I have this more or less definitive version of it on Blu-ray, which I got maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And the thing that's disappointing with this version, obviously the the clarity of the film is, just astoundingly beautiful, but there's no special features on here. It has 4 commentary tracks, and commentary tracks are on most DVDs, pretty much all DVDs, and then it's a big thing on Blu-rays and 4K as well. And commentary tracks are really awesome. I have sit through a lot of them and listened to a lot of them, and I've learned a lot about the films I love through them. But the thing that I find that's hard for me to, there's a lot of commentaries I don't check out. And the thing is, and again, it's just my own little pet peeve, is that, for instance, there's 4 commentary tracks on this film. So essentially, to get through it, you have to watch the film 4 or 5 times in a row. And that's kind of a lot of time. I'd rather just watch the movie. So what I end up doing all the time is the special features component, like documentaries about a movie that I love, or just interviews. That shit's what I'm all about. And that stuff is what I will always dig into. This only has commentary tracks, which is super disappointing. But on the other hand, this Steelbook edition that I have, which is amazing, and I think I'm going to watch this again, and compare and contrast. This is the original restored and remastered version, and it's uncut, I think, too. This has like hours of special features on here. Like, there's 2 amazing documentaries on here. There's a really great documentary with Gunnar Hansen, rest in peace. It's astounding. It's one of the best collection of special features that I own, and it's a beautiful edition for DVD too. Like, it's actually looks better than the Blu-ray. There's 2 discs on here. There's the feature film, and then there's hours of special features. But it's amazing. Like, it's like you're taking a college course in the history of Texas. It's unbelievable. But this is like the best edition only because it's got all these special features. But I kind of want to watch and contrast the quality, like the visual and audio quality. The other thing that why I love this film so much, and why I think it's just so important and just so influential for me, when you have your classic monster movies, or your classic villains in slasher movies, for instance. You have, I call them like the big 4. You have Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, and I would say the 4th one is Leatherface. And of course, I call those characters in horror the big 4. For instance, for example. And I love all of those characters to death. They are all iconic. They're part of the American fabric of horror. And, they are household names. And of course, there are lots of other classic monsters, or in the slasher genre, that are equally as important, that should be included as well. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to those 4, the big 4. And for me, like, for instance, Friday the 13th is my favorite horror franchise of all time. I did another big show where I watched all the movies, and I did a bunch of videos on them last year, and I've done multiple videos on those films. And as a franchise itself, but then as a horror franchise, slasher genre, it's hands down my favorite that there is, because I just feel like it's so consistent and it's so fun and it's just great. I just have the best time watching those movies. But that being said, Leatherface at the end of the day is my favorite character in the big 4. And I think it's because there's a lot of different reasons. I think, with Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, um, they're like classic slasher villains, more or less. And without sounding were demeaning they're kind of the one dimensional. They're one dimensional. They serve a purpose in the film to move the story along, and they're iconic, and they just have this incredible presence on the screen. But for the most part, as far as their characters, you know, they're a little bit more one dimensional. But with Leatherface, I've always felt like his character, aside from being the most, intimidating and the most imposing and the most terrifying character, I think he is, as a just character in itself, played by Gunnar Hansen, the late great Gunnar Hansen, which I actually have a signed autograph poster of him, which is amazing. I think Leatherface, the character itself, he's such a complicated, fucked up character, and he's got all of these different kind of dimensions to his character. I think on one hand, there's the homicidal fucking insanity of him, but then the other side of his character is that he's like, at his core, he's just kind of this like totally terrified and scared little child that has no strength or no direction. And I've always felt that is so cool, like, because there's like he's so terrifying and this complete homicidal maniac, but yet he's kind of this frightened little child. And Gunnar Hansen's portrayal of Leatherface in Texas, the original, you see that. You see, where he's like so frightening and just this monster, but then you see moments of where he's like this broken, 5-year-old kid that has no, bearings, no, can't stand on his own two legs. And the other thing too is he is he's obviously suffered some really insane trauma because of his incredibly fucked up family, but you also get a sense that he's like severely mentally retarded. So that makes it even more complex. And the other thing that I find that's so fascinating about his character is that there's this kind of androgynous aspect of his character, where he kind of does wear women's clothing too, as well. So he's even more complicated and more layered. And so there's this like androgyny about his character. There's this, homicidal aspect to him, but yet he's this scared and afraid of everything, little child kind of a character. um and I just feel like it makes the character so rich and that much more terrifying, because at one moment you don't know how he's going to react. You don't know if he's going to run away or cry or be this broken little boy, or the next minute he'll like chop your head off and kill you. And so he's got this level of just like reckless abandon when he's on screen. He's just kind of this like raving maniac, and you don't really know how he's going to like react to everything. When you see him on the screen, he's just like completely out of control. And I just love that about his character. So I wanted to do another show on this film because I think it's, uh, not just the obvious horror, the ramifications of how important this movie is to the genre of horror and horror exploitation, but just in general as a fan of film, like, it's one of the most important movies ever made. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.